item as well. So brilliant. So I'm going to try and share my screen with you now. And maybe actually, first of all, before we do that, if you wouldn't mind, it would be really nice to know who's on the call. So I wonder whether you would be happy just unmuting your microphones and maybe just introducing yourselves and saying perhaps why you've attended today's session. So I'm gonna just go around the group in no order, particularly just as I see you on the screen. So Esther, hello.
Hello, I'm Esther Charkham, and I am a member, and I work with the LJS on their refugee drop-in. I actually kind of do one-to-one clothing and special requests. I'm not really a part of the interviewing process, but I thought it would be really useful for me to be here just in case.
Brilliant, thank you. And Jill.
Hello, I'm also a member of the LJS, and I go to I volunteer at the drop-in. I'm also not involved as an interviewer. I do the cooking and serving food, and I get to chat to the guests who come along, and I just feel I can make a better contribution if I know more about their background, more about the whole issue.
Yeah, thank you. And Tasneem. So you're just on mute.
You're muted.
Yeah, I'm also a friend of the LJS and have helped in the drop-in with the interviewing process as well as with the food and various jobs, really, wherever I'm needed. But also I have other. I've been helping with I've been away for a few months, but before that I was helping with the Afghani refugees who have arrived, you know, in, you know when. And also with a detention action, I volunteer for them. So you see a wide range of people with needs.
Brilliant, thank you. And Lucy? So we're not hearing anything.
No, you're muted.
Oh, it doesn't look like the sound is coming through. That's okay. Feel free to type into the chat if you would like to. Yeah. Okay, and Maren.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, I'm also a member of the LJS and have volunteered with a drop-in, but very interested in the subject overall. Don't have that much experience, but yeah, shocked to hear that slavery is still going on. So I would, it's something that I would like to get involved with. So I'd like to hear more. But I also have to apologize. I have to drop at 12 o'clock. I'm actually traveling. So if I drop in and out, it's due to my connection.
No problem.
But, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And Kiara?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, trying to start the video, but it's complicated. Sorry. Yeah, so I'm also a volunteer with I'm not sure which drop-in you guys are mentioning. I'm with the new North London synagogue drop-in. And yeah, I volunteer as I was in the induction team at the beginning, so showing people around, which means, you know, one-to-one for a long time. And I'm now doing the interviews, which is also, you know, a closer contact. So I, you know, thought this was definitely worth learning more about. So yeah, thank you.
And Arthur?
Hello, good morning. Yes, like a lot of you, I'm involved with the LJS, and I just got involved a couple of months before the pandemic broke. So really looking forward to getting re-involved again, and just want to know more about what's really going on out there. What really calls me is to know what's going on behind some of the people we see on the streets, some of the people we hear about, the asylum seekers, the Afghanis, etc. And yeah, every time I walk past some nail shops, I always wonder how many of them are actually slaves. So really intrigued to learn more and contribute in whatever way I can. Great to be here. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. And Arthur.
Hi, my name is Arthur. I volunteer at the West London Synagogue Asylum Seeker Drop-In. And yeah, I'm here because I'm really curious in finding out more about the subject, and maybe I'm often at the registration where people drop in and I'm the sort of first point of contact. So I feel like it's really useful to have some kind of tips as to how to deal with these things.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you. And Lucy, I think you've typed in the chat.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Ah, yes, the volume's come back. Okay.
God. WLS. Nothing. See. I used to do all the clothes way back. Now, of course, we can't do it in the same way. So I'm just a volunteer, a normal volunteer.
Fantastic. Oh, well, thank you so much for introducing yourselves. And we've got such a wide range of interest and experience on the line. And actually, I find when I work with groups who are working at the grassroots level, often you are the ones who are going to be in a prime situation to potentially identify victims of modern slavery. So really value your attendance today, and we look forward to hearing a bit more about your experience and knowledge as well as we go through the session. I'm going to share my screen now, so hopefully you can see that. So today we're going to be overviewing modern slavery and human trafficking, and the session aims, oh, this is where the technology starts. The session aims today are to define modern slavery and human trafficking, to explore the different types of exploitation and under the umbrella of modern slavery. We will look at how to spot the signs or the indicators. We'll also touch on the national referral mechanism, which is the government's safeguarding mechanism for survivors or victims of modern slavery. We'll also explore common barriers to disclosure, as well as how to report concerns. And I'm aware that the majority of you are in the context of working with refugees. So although this is a general awareness session, we'll also try and touch on some of those issues as well, particularly relating to that context. So, let's have a bit of a group conversation. So how many different forms or types of modern slavery can you list? So feel free to type into the chat or to unmute yourself and to share with the group.
Sexual slavery, prostitution, that sort of thing.
Thank you, Jill. Yes, sexual exploitation. That's definitely one of the key ones that we encounter here in the UK.
What about, I always worry when you see men in inadequate clothing standing around a car wash thing and washing cars as fast as they possibly can. I always wonder whether they are in some sort of slavery system.
Yeah. So yeah, some form of labour, including car wash, that can be.
Or agricultural labour.
And agricultural labour as well. In the chat, we've got...
Building and construction workers as well, lots from Eastern Europe.
Yes, that's definitely an area of concern.
And of course, nail parlours.
Yes. And in the chat, we've got illegal farming work. We've also got domestic servitude mentioned, and then labour exploitation. Anything else? Okay, so I think we've covered a fair few. So here's a list of different forms. So we've mentioned labour and sexual exploitation. We've got domestic servitude, which we mentioned. We didn't mention forced criminality, which we'll touch on, where people are forced to commit criminal acts. We've got forced marriage, debt bondage, and we'll be covering in more detail each of these as we go along. Also benefit and financial fraud, and then also organ harvesting. And in the chat, we've also got child labour, and each of these different types could also relate to minors or children. So as we go through, we'll be unpacking a little bit of each of these, but do feel free to type any questions in the chat as we go as well. So modern slavery and human trafficking, what is it? So modern slavery is known as the fastest growing international crime. There's an estimated 40 million people in slavery worldwide, and 1 in 4 of those are children. In 2020, there were 10,613 potential victims referred into the National Referral Mechanism. So the NRM, for short, is the UK's safeguarding mechanism. So those individuals were identified within the UK and referred into the NRM also within the UK. The figure was similar in 2019. We've got the figures for the second quarter of 21, and there was 3,140 potential victims of modern slavery referred to the Home Office into the NRM, and 47% of these were children. In terms of the estimated number, Britain is home to an estimated 136,000 victims of modern slavery. Of course, the figures aren't exact because it's a hidden crime and we don't know exactly how many people, but there's been a couple of studies that are estimating well over 100,000. So if we break that down to population, it's 2,000, it's 2 people per 1,000 population. So for example, I live in the borough of Southend in Essex. So there's about 180,000 people who live here. So if we relate the statistics into this area, it would be an estimated 400 people who are kept in some form of modern slavery, being exploited in the ways that we've highlighted before. The NRM we will explore in more detail later, but it was introduced in 2009 as a safeguarding mechanism to support and identify victims of modern slavery. So the numbers that you can see there are those who have been identified and willing to go into the NRM. However, there are quite a number of others, potential victims who are potentially identified who don't want to go into the NRM. So these numbers are only the official numbers, whereas, for example, in some of the projects or contexts that you work in, you may encounter victims who don't want to go into the NRM, and they may receive support in other ways from the community, and therefore they wouldn't be included in these figures. So these are the official figures. So in some ways it's representative of what's happening officially, but there will be many, many more who are also identified each year who aren't included in these statistics. So in terms of the numbers, here you can see the NRM referrals from 2014 to 2020. So you can see the figures increasing as we go along, and there's different reasons for that. I think as a community and society, we're getting better at identifying potential victims. but there's also the possibility that exploitation is also increasing. And in terms of the exploitation type, here on the right-hand side, you can see the NRM referrals by exploitation type as well as by age group. So the purple, dark purple represent adults, the pink children, and then the kind of colour in between is unknown. So criminal exploitation was by far the largest exploitation type in 2020. And this is largely down to the issue of county lines, which some of you will know about, which is where often children or teenagers are recruited by gangs to transport drugs and to distribute drugs. So they're forced to do that, and they're often groomed for that purpose. And you can see that the majority of the age group in that bracket are children who have been exploited in that way. Labour exploitation is the second most common exploitation type, and then sexual exploitation. And yeah, you've got the other figures just below there as well. In terms of referrals by nationality, so the most common referrals, the nationalities of potential victims in 21 are UK nationals. So again, you can see that the majority are UK nationals that are children. And again, the reason for that is predominantly to do with county lines and transporting, being recruited and exploited for the transport of drugs. Albanian nationals are the second most commonly represented group, and the majority of those are adults. And then thirdly, Vietnamese, and then fourthly, Eritrean, Sudanese, Iranian, Romanian, and so on. The other nationalities represent over 100 other nationalities of potential victims. So within the UK, we're finding that nationalities, that the potential victims can be from anywhere around the world, but these are the most commonly represented countries of origin of people who have been exploited. And again, these are for people within the national referral mechanism. So in terms of the definition of modern slavery and human trafficking, in 2015, Theresa May, who was then the Home Secretary, brought in the Modern Slavery Act. And modern slavery is defined as when a person holds another person in slavery or servitude, making them perform forced or compulsory labour. Human trafficking is slightly different because it's about facilitating travel. So it's when a person arranges or facilitates the travel of another person with a view to that person being exploited. And if we think of modern slavery almost as the umbrella, we've got the different forms of modern slavery, such as forced criminality, labour exploitation, sexual exploitation, all being underneath that umbrella. And human trafficking also is really under the umbrella of modern slavery. It's really about the transportation of people being trafficked. But this can be across international boundaries. It can be within a country itself, so from London to Manchester, but it can also be on one street to the next street. So if a person is moved within a local community for the purpose of exploitation, it's also considered as human trafficking. So human trafficking is a three-part process. So we have the act, the means, and the purpose. So the act is what is done to the individual. So possibly they are recruited or transported or transferred or harboured or received. And the means is how that act is done. So there could be threats or violence, there could be coercion or abduction, there could be deception. So for example, sometimes people are offered jobs in the UK and they come here with the perception that they will be working as an au pair or in a cafe, but then they are forced into some form of exploitation. It's also about the abuse of power as well as the abuse of vulnerability. So often exploiters, they target quite vulnerable groups of people. And of course, for you working with refugees, you will know about certain vulnerabilities that some of the people that you're working with have. And that may be concerns of finance, there may be concerns of healthcare or education. They may not have access to adequate food or to adequate housing. And of course, all of these vulnerabilities make these people more vulnerable, and traffickers often target people who are vulnerable. So how I got into working with survivors and victims of modern slavery was because I was doing work in the local community with homeless people, and they were being offered work and accommodation in exchange for labour. But what we found was that they were often threatened and abused, and they were forced to work very, very long hours for little or no money. And when they tried to leave, they were threatened, and because of vulnerability, they found it incredibly difficult or impossible to get out of the situation. And in terms of the final part, the purpose, so the purpose is why the act and the means is done. So it's about the exploitation that is happening. And of course, for an exploiter or a trafficker, it's always about the financial gain that they can get from that individual. So drugs, you can sell them once, you can sell the drug once, and of course it's profitable for the person selling or the gang master selling the drug. With a person, you can exploit them multiple times, and there's multiple returns on the money or the investment for the trafficker. So this is why trafficking has become so prevalent. It's very lucrative for those who are doing the exploiting. And we've got a question in the chat from Jill, who's asking, is there trafficking of refugees by boat from Calais, for example? It's a really good question, and we're going to be looking at the difference between trafficking and people smuggling in the next slide, possibly. And so we'll have a conversation about that as we go along. In terms of the means, so for children, the means does not need to be present within child trafficking. So they can be recruited or transferred for the purpose of exploitation, and the means doesn't need to be proven within that context because they are minors. Okay, so I think we're going to have a bit of group work, and we're going to have 3 scenarios, and I think Esther's going to break you out into different rooms. So possibly, I don't know, Esther, if it's possible to do 3 rooms. And
yes, it's definitely possible.
Fantastic. So if each room could take one of these scenarios and discuss if this is trafficking, and then we can have some feedback as a whole group together. So maybe if room 1 could take the first scenario, room 2 the second, room 3 the third. And if you could think through the act, the means, and the purpose. So think through in each of these scenarios, is the act, the means, and the purpose present for what is happening in this situation? So we'll take probably about 4 or 5 minutes to do this, if that's okay.
I'm just assigning them now. Dan, it will probably tell you to join one and you just have to probably just not. join
Okay.
it. So there might be one room with 2 people. It should be fine.
Yeah, that's no problem.
Okay, those should be open now. And Kiara hasn't joined, but maybe it's because she's probably maybe half in, half out of the session.
Yes.
Do you want me to drop the message to the breakout rooms? Can they see this? I can't remember if they can see it or not.
I'm not sure that they can.
I can just give them, I can send like a message. Oh, Edna is unassigned and she's just joined. Oh, she's got a new person. Okay, I'm gonna wait. I'll just join the waiting room.
Is it possible for us to go into the rooms to see if they, I'm gonna join room 3 just to see if they can see anything.
Yeah, that's fine. If not, I can write them a message, basically, just if that makes sense. Hi, Dan.
Hi. So they can't see the slides in the breakout room. So possibly we might just need to come back in together and do it as one group.
Is that better? Would you prefer that?
Yeah, they can't remember the.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I think should we just bring them back then?
I think so.
Okay, hold on. Okay. Yeah, I've given them 60. If you want, is your PowerPoint on PowerPoint, or is it like a linkable one? Is it on Google Slides?
So it's on PowerPoint.
Okay, cool. That's fine.
Hi, we couldn't see, we were in a room and we couldn't see any of the scenarios.
Yes, so that's why we've brought you back a little bit.
Okay, right.
Realised that it was going to be quite difficult for you to do it without seeing the scenarios. So I think we'll just do it as a group if that's okay.
Fine.
We've got a fairly small group anyway, so it's not a problem. So the first one, Peter from Poland was promised a job in a meat processing factory in the UK. He worked up to 60 hours per week for no money. His employers threatened him if he tried to leave. So thinking about the act, the means and the purpose, do we think this is trafficking or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, would anyone like to say why?
Well, there's several reasons why. He was promised a job. Presumably, they brought him over here. 60 hours a week is way beyond what anybody should be working. You should be being paid, and you can't be threatened if you want to leave. And I'm guessing that in that he was probably in a dormitory in a barn, or in the factory itself. So that's definitely trafficking, isn't it?
Spot on. So we've got the act. So he was recruited and possibly transported. It doesn't say exactly, for the purpose of labour exploitation. So we know it's labour exploitation because he's not being paid properly for the work. And you rightly identified that there was threats involved if he tried to leave. So we've got all three of those parts. So yes, it's definitely trafficking. So if we move on to the next slide. So Maria works in the sex industry in London to earn money to send back to her family in Romania, where her earnings from prostitution were a lot less. So would anyone else like to comment and say if they think that this is trafficking or not?
Maren and I disagreed about this. I thought it was not trafficking, and Maren thought maybe it was. But I thought it wasn't trafficking because we're not told that she was transported against her will. We're not told that she was offered the work in London. She seems to have come of her own free will and has chosen how she's going to make her money. And prostitution is not a nice way to earn your money, but that's what she's doing. And she's sending the money back to her family, which is what she wanted to do.
Yes, that's my thoughts as well, is that she's here by choice, really.
Yeah. No, I'm rereading the sentence. It's definitely, I thought she was able to send less money back, but the way it's written, I totally agree now as well.
Oh, good. Maybe we're wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, really helpful feedback. So from this little scenario, I think you're spot on with the information that we have. Of course, if we got to know Maria, we may discover a wider story and a wider narrative about what is going on. But from this small amount of information, it seems like it's her own free choice. It seems like she moved here from her own will and volition. And it seems like, yeah, she's able to do what she wants with the money that she earns. Of course, this doesn't cover questions about her own vulnerability and how she got into prostitution initially. So there could be a wider area of concern, but from this initial bit, we don't think this is trafficking.
Excuse me, can I just ask, I probably missed something here. Are we using the terms, modern day slavery and trafficking? Is it sort of interchangingly? What is the...
Yeah, so we're...
Sure.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So with the definitions, we've got modern slavery almost as the umbrella. It's when another person holds another person in slavery or servitude. With human trafficking, there is that element of it, but it's about the transportation of that individual. With modern slavery, the transportation doesn't need to be present for them to be exploited. So for example, one person could be exploited in one location and not transported. So that would be modern slavery, and not human trafficking. But for example, in the scenario of Peter, we would say that he's a victim of modern slavery and human trafficking because he was transported as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So number 3. So Lou has paid a substantial sum of money to his friend's uncle for a place on a boat that will get him from the Belgian coast to Essex. So any thoughts on this one?
He has the possibility of being forced to work or whatever. It could become trafficking, but just because he was paid a large amount of money suggests that it probably is will be trafficking, but we don't know from this information that it will be.
I'm not sure. I think they've probably got all the money they're going to get out of him, aren't they?
Well, we don't know that, do we? From what
He's paid
a substantial amount, more than he probably should have done.
Yeah. but they haven't promised him to bring him here.
Then he's got a place on a boat that will get him from the Belgian coast to Essex. So they haven't promised him a job.
Yeah.
They haven't said that he has to do any particular work, but he may be forced into it. We don't know.
So is the definition of trafficking that they transport the people here, they pay for it, rather than the fact that the people pay themselves to get here? Is my question.
So that's a good question. So we've got the possibility of the means, so how it's done. So I guess the question would be whether this individual is going to be exploited at the end of the journey. Yes. So if he is, then there has been deception involved. So for Lou, he understands that he's being transported to the UK in exchange for money. And when he arrives here, he will be free to go on his way. So if the journey then ended up in exploitation of some type,
that would be trafficking.
Then that would be trafficking. So here we've got the difference between people smuggling and being trafficked. So it's a little bit more subtle, isn't it? And you know, what you've contributed is absolutely right. So from just this little bit of information, it seems that he is being smuggled into the UK. And this comes back to the question about people from Calais are potentially you know, being trafficked in this way. And the question is, what will happen to this individual or others once they get to the UK? Actually, will they be then coerced and controlled into doing some form of labour or sexual exploitation or forced criminality?
So you would say that this is not human trafficking so much as smuggling.
Yeah.
Is that the alternate way of looking at it?
Yes.
Because obviously this is an illegal way of coming. Otherwise, he would have just got an ordinary ferry from Belgium to Essex. So he's not coming an ordinary way, but he's being smuggled because it's not a legal route.
Yes. Yes. So with smuggling and breaking international law, it's always across international boundaries. Whereas with trafficking, it can be across international boundaries, but it can also be internally within a country itself. So we've got the difference here of him being smuggled into the UK, whereas some other people are trafficked. So you know, for the people who are doing the smuggling, it really depends on what the situation is. That, you know, are they going to let him free at the end of it, or actually will they take him somewhere else for some other purpose?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then he's potentially being transported under being deceived. He thinks he's going to be free at the end of it. He's given the money himself for this journey. But his exploiters, when he arrives in the UK, it could be possible that he will be exploited for one of those purposes.
So the exploitation of the actual money for transport is not necessarily considered human trafficking, because it's obviously a huge amount of money. So that is an exploitation, isn't it, of financial exploitation?
Yeah. So that would be a different crime rather than specifically modern slavery. So I mean, that could be, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give exact details, but it would be more about fraud, him handing over money with the purpose of something. Whereas, you know, if it's not being used for what he thought it was, then it would be fraud and theft potentially. So modern slavery and trafficking, it's more about the exploitation of the individual. Yeah. Okay, so each of these three scenarios, they give, you know, some of the challenges that are involved relating to trafficking and modern slavery, and some of the complexities and the nuances that are involved within this. If we continue, if we just think about our own situations and circumstances, so possibly within our work context or our volunteering context, what circumstances and situations might you come across potential victims of modern slavery? So feel free to type into the chat or to unmute.
I think that the most common is exploitation, labor. You know, like unknowingly, we were privately. You know, we had some people building an extension. We didn't realize it until later that actually that was really, you know, exploitation and trafficking of the work.
Was it exploitation or was it slavery?
Well, I think
it was exploitation, but was it slavery?
Yeah, well, you know, I would say it was, because there were the conditions in which they lived and worked were completely organized, which we didn't, you know, we didn't, when they came, we didn't know, but as they were building the place and we talked to them, we realized what was going on. But, you know, it's so like, and, you know, we know of other circumstances as well, where, you know, when this can happen, and people you support as well might be doing jobs or being asked to do things which you realize later that it's, you know, there have been, somebody I visited at the, one of the detention, I mean, it was an obvious case of being totally controlled and in labor, in servitude by his masters, and then, so, you know, there's that's, I have come across personally people who have been, you know, trafficked or modern slavery, yeah, in terms of work situation, yeah, either in detention or personally.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. That's really helpful, and it's quite shocking, isn't it, when it's literally happening within our own doorstep and, you know, on our own community. And anyone else?
Well, I've mentioned car wash, people who are operating car washes. I just feel they're probably being exploited.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
I met a Filipino lady sitting on a bench in a park. This has got to be 12 years ago, sobbing. So I asked her what was wrong, what could I do to help? And the entire story came out. So I gathered some friends, a lawyer friend together, and we immediately got her out of the home that she was, for she was allowed out one afternoon a week, and this was the afternoon that we found her. So, and, you know, a lawyer friend kind of took over, and social services, and she stayed here for she'd been here for 10 years, sending money back to the Philippines, but she interestingly, she retired, it must have been longer ago. She retired last year with some money in her bank and was able to go back to the Philippines to her family, but she had been brought here by a family from, I think, from Dubai. They'd taken her to Dubai and then they brought her here, and she was their housekeeper, and she had, her passport had been taken away. She had one afternoon off a week and very little money was given to her, and she couldn't get away because she didn't know where to go. So, you know, it's been happening for years, and I think we all just need to be vigilant. If somebody looks unhappy or scared, then we need to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it sounds like you were in the right place at the right time to be able to offer that assistance.
Absolutely, absolutely. But, you know, my family always say to me, why do you talk to strangers? But, you know, I do.
Yeah, no, but I mean, that's a wonderful story, and an example of, you know, how all of us within the community can play a part.
Yeah, yeah.
How crucial it is for us to be able to know identifiers or indicators of exploitation.
Also, agricultural workers, potato pickers or something like that, they could be exploited.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about the different forms of modern slavery, the types of exploitation in a little bit more detail. Firstly, we'll explore sexual exploitation. So this can occur in residential homes, of course, massage parlours, online, and particularly during lockdown and during the pandemic, exploitation types went more online. And I know within the area where I am, sexual services were still being offered online, even during lockdown. And of course, we know it can occur on the street. Fast food outlets have also been a way
Really?
connecting individuals with exploiters. So particularly we think of the three girls whose sexual exploitation grabbed the headlines in Rochdale. I don't know if you saw the Three Girls drama, which was on television fairly recently, but it was about groups of men who were grooming teenage girls for the purpose of sexual exploitation. And the girls were met by these perpetrators at some of the fast food outlets that there were within the community. And of course, children and young people, as well as men and women, are targeted for the purpose of sexual exploitation. Another area that has also become quite common or prevalent is pop-up brothels. So this is where a location is used as a brothel for a short period of time. And it's more difficult for the police to crack down on it because it potentially moves location every week or every month. And so this can happen in Airbnb holiday lets, as well as hotels or short-term lets. There was a scenario of a gentleman who attended an awareness raising workshop I did with a local church. And he was a retired man who phoned me after the workshop saying that he lived on quite a nice street within the area. And he'd seen that the house opposite his had been rented out, and he'd seen two men take two women into the house, and there were men who were frequenting the house, and he just said, it doesn't feel right. There's something which is going on that just doesn't feel good about what's happening. And so he phoned the police to just tell them what was happening. He said, look, I don't know for sure, but this is my suspicion. They came and investigated, and it was being used as a temporary brothel. And the two women who were in there had been trafficked for the purpose of sexual exploitation. And the police were able to safeguard them and to give them the support that they needed. But again, it just shows the importance of educating people within our local communities about the different forms of modern slavery, because it's really for those of us, just on ordinary streets, who can really keep an eye on what's going on and potentially help quite vulnerable people.
interestingly, the 3 girls scandal I followed closely because a friend of mine was the prosecutor, Nazir Afzal. So, and he was, you know, fought for years in order to bring those men to prosecution. So it was a little romanticized, I think, the play, but.
Yes, I'm sure it was.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was very much an uphill struggle.
Yeah.
I remember the case, though. It was a big case, wasn't it?
It was a huge case, yeah. And Nazir was the prosecutor, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And locally here in Southend, we use this case study of something that happened within our own community. In 2012, Colin Trotman and Reynold Dyatt from London made contact with 2 teenage girls in Southend. They were both giving the girls cigarettes, cannabis, and alcohol. And in return, the alcohol-dependent girls who had difficulties at home gave sexual favours, some of which took place in Trotman's car. The girls were trafficked 3 miles down the road from Southend to Shoebury-Ness for the purpose of exploitation. And after an allegation of rape and a police investigation, Trotman and Dyatt were convicted of 5 offences, including sexual activity with a child and also rape. So yeah, sadly, we know that these situations go on in different, in our respective communities. Let's move on to labour exploitation. And we've mentioned quite a few of these areas already, including car washes. Within the last 5 years, car washes have really become quite a phenomenon in that there's over 22,000 car washes within the UK, and 18,000 of those are unregulated. So I don't know if you've come across the car wash app, which has been developed by the Cluer initiative, but it's an app that you can download for your phone, and it's something that you use when you go to get your car washed. And the app, it takes you through a number of questions. So for example, are the people who are working in this car wash, have they got protective clothing on? It asks you how much you've paid for the car wash. It asks you a number of questions to give an indication of, are these people potentially being exploited? So it's quite a useful tool. And the information, it takes your kind of GPS reference, so it shows where you are, but then the information is submitted anonymously to the National Crime Agency, and they're able to follow up if they think that there's a problem of exploitation there. So I'll type it in the chat. So it's just called the Car Wash app, and it's by the Cluer initiative. We've also mentioned nail bars, and yeah, again, we know that this is a high area of concern, particularly for Vietnamese nationals. We've mentioned the construction industry, and yeah, a really good example was given from yourselves about that happening with your own building. Also restaurants and takeaways, so that could involve people working behind the scenes, either in the kitchen, cooking or cleaning, or it could be the waiting staff as well. We've also got the care sector, and so that in Southend here, we've had a number of scenarios where particularly people from the South African subcontinent, so the Zimbabwe area, Zimbabwean nationals have taken jobs in care homes, and they may not have all the necessary paperwork, and the care homes end up exploiting them because of that. So giving them reduced wages or giving them accommodation and then not paying them a wage, saying that they owe all of their wages for the accommodation that's been provided. And then of course also the cleaning sector as well. And Esther's put the link in the chat for the car wash app. So in terms of a case study,
could I just ask a question?
Yes, please do.
What about, you know, when you see like mentally ill or homeless people that are begging, and in my area where we live, there's quite a few, and they say they're also being exploited, that there's people organizing them to go and ask and beg, and they're always sitting at the same places, although they have accommodation. Where would that fall?
Yeah, so that would also come under the category of modern slavery as well, because often, vulnerable people such as those who are homeless or those who've got learning difficulties or vulnerabilities, they're recruited for the purpose of criminal exploitation. So forced begging would be classed as criminal exploitation. So yes, it would be, they would potentially be victims of modern slavery. So we'll talk a little bit about numbers or ways that we can be involved in safeguarding, and also the national referral mechanism, and the opportunities that there are for vulnerable people to find freedom and also to be safeguarded. Yeah. So this case study, it gives an example of vulnerable and homeless people being recruited. So this involves the Rooney family, and this made national headlines again. If you do a Google search, you'd find quite a lot of articles or BBC News articles relating to this. So the 10 men and 1 woman, they ran a driveway resurfacing company, which used workers housed in caravans without running water or toilet facilities. The victims worked long hours to fund what the police described as a lavish lifestyle of the Rooney family. One particular individual had worked for the family for 26 years. And during Operation Pottery in 2014, there was 18 victims who were freed from exploitation from this family. 50% of those were British, and they were vulnerable men who were picked up from homeless shelters or soup kitchens. And the family, they lived in luxury while their slaves were kept in very poor conditions, working long hours. Apparently the chief superintendent who investigated the case, she said that the victims had become completely institutionalized and were only fed when they worked, and at times that was restricted to just the family's leftovers. So here in Southend, we had similar scenarios where people would go to homeless shelters or gather outside charities or churches or faith groups that were offering services for homeless people, and they would offer them jobs. And so we had to do quite a bit of work with local charities in awareness raising and highlighting that this was occurring. But also we did workshops with the homeless community themselves, talking about the issue of labour exploitation. And for me, the sad thing was that at each of the workshops we did, individuals from the homeless community, they told stories of exploitation. So it wasn't just a one-off case that we came across, it was multiple people who had been exploited. And so we had to do quite a bit of work with the local police, and we would report the registration numbers of any vehicles that were loitering outside where vulnerable people gathered, and then they were able to follow up and to move them on or to run checks on the vehicles. So sadly, these aren't isolated cases, and I know the speaker at next week's session. She works very much with the homeless community, and I'm sure she'll be able to share a little bit more about this. Okay, and then forced criminality. This is people being forced to commit criminal acts. And so we mentioned about on-street begging and some of the individuals that you've encountered.
Is that actually criminal? Is it a criminal offence to beg?
So I think in some situations it is. The police can bring out orders for known people within the area where they're restricted from doing that. I think the criminal aspect comes in when people are being forced to do it. So of course that would be incorporated within modern slavery.
Yeah.
We've also got cannabis farming. And this tends, from the statistics we know, it tends to be very much relating to Albanian and also Vietnamese gangs who are within the UK, and also bringing in people from their own countries to tend the cannabis farms. And it's been difficult for the police because often they'll do a raid on a cannabis farm and they won't know who is the victim and who is the perpetrator. So if they find someone there who's tending the cannabis, it's difficult for them to know exactly, are they the person who set up the farm, or actually is this person being exploited and being forced to do this? So the police are getting better at being able to identify potential victims in this situation. We've also mentioned county lines or drug running as being one of the main types of forced criminality, particularly with children. Cuckooing is where a flat or accommodation is taken over by a gang. So for example, someone who's quite vulnerable within the community, they may be befriended by someone who then ends up taking over their flat for the purpose of distributing drugs or other exploitation. And that person's in a very difficult situation in terms of, you know, they're not free within their own accommodation. They're coerced and controlled usually. Forced marriage is also another area, and this often has involved people from other countries of origin coming into the UK. And this may also include things such as benefit fraud, where an individual's benefits are taken from them by the spouse. Or it could include domestic servitude, where someone is brought into the UK or forced to marry and they are exploited within their own home. Or it could be for passport or migration issues as well. It may be easier for an individual to live or reside in a different country if they are married to a person of that nationality. Benefit fraud, again, there's been situations where very vulnerable people's benefits have been taken by exploiters. So the Department of Work and Pensions, they have a whole team investigating this area, and particularly modern slavery and trafficking, relating to benefit fraud. Forced burglary, again, where people are forced to commit criminal acts and to go into people's homes and burgle them. And then, of course, shellfish picking. And we may remember the tragedy that happened in Morecambe, where there was a number of Chinese nationals who were forced to cockle pick, and the tides came in, and sadly they died from drowning in that situation. But that was organised crime. It was they were trafficked into the UK for the purpose of that exploitation. So there's a number of different aspects of forced criminality. I think before we move on to the next session, I think we'll have a 5-minute break, just a comfort break. So feel free to turn off your videos, or if you've got any questions you think of during the break, feel free to type them into the chat. We'll come back in 5 minutes. So it's 11:12 now. So let's come back at 11:17.
Dan, what time does the session end? Hello?
The session ends at 12 o'clock.
Ah, okay. I'll have to leave promptly because I'm catching a train, so I might leave 5 minutes before. So
That's no problem at all.
okay. Thanks very much. Anyway, it's been fantastic so far. So good.
That's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi Dan, just I don't know if you're also on a break. It's fine if you are, just saying that I'm here and if you need anything.
Okay, so hopefully we are feeling a little bit more refreshed, and maybe you've been able to grab a quick drink as well. Feel free to put your videos back on if you're back with us. I'll just give it a moment and then we'll make a start again. Okay, so we'll continue with the different forms of modern slavery, and we'll begin by looking at domestic servitude. So this is where individuals are exploited within homes often, and it can involve cooking and cleaning, doing chores. It can involve childcare as well as doing school runs. It often involves long hours and very limited freedom of movement. We had a situation here within Southend of an individual who was attending one of our local churches. And so we'll call her Irma, we've changed her name. But when she attended the church, she appeared shy and nervous and quite scared. The professional family that she was working for were GPs within the local area, and they would drop her off at the church and collect her exactly 1 hour later. And this didn't really allow her much time to be able to interact with the other churchgoers. But in brief conversations, it became clear that she was not being paid properly for her work, and she was not allowed out of the house without permission. The hours that she was working were incredibly long, and the two sons in the house often ridiculed her. She told the other people in the church that she wasn't able to leave the family because she had a debt to pay off. So she was originally from India, and her husband was disabled, and she was offered by a local family that in return for them building a small house or a shack for her husband to live in, that she would come to the UK and work for the extended family to repay the debt. But it became clear that it wasn't going to be possible to pay off this debt anytime soon. So the family were using this as a means of control and coercion in order for her to stay. Eventually, she pleaded with the family to return back to India. And as far as the church knows, that is what happened. That's what happened to her in that situation. So again, it's interesting that often places of worship are also places where some of the potential victims come to, and the family would use her attending the church as a reward. So if she worked especially hard that week, she was able to attend the service.
Dan, were they not prosecuted?
Sadly, she didn't make a charge against them.
Oh.
And so, yeah, there was no...
GP, God.
Yeah, a really sad situation.
Very.
Yeah. So in terms of signs or indicators of modern slavery, these are some of the things that may be evident. People may be separated from their passports or identification documents. And again, this is a way perpetrators control them. They may be fearful or anxious or distrustful of authorities. So again, we don't know what the perpetrators have told the individuals. You know, possibly if you are found, you will be deported, maybe if they've overstayed visas or if they're here without the correct documentation. Often they have limited or no social interaction. Sometimes they're spoken, someone speaks on their behalf. So this is often the case if people need medical treatment. The exploiter will accompany them and speak on their behalf. Or even they might have a story that appears rehearsed, that has been told to them in order to say if they have interaction with people. Of course, there may be physical or psychological trauma. They may believe that they have a debt to pay off, as in the situation of Irma. They may have lack of access to medical care or strange injuries. There may be a lack of personal protective equipment. So for example, with car washes, they use chemicals. And so they're meant to be provided with boots and also gloves. There was a situation here in Essex where one individual had to have his trainers surgically removed from his feet because the chemicals had corroded onto them, and because of the lack of PPE. There may also be a lack of possessions, and then also overcrowded accommodation. So possibly rented accommodation is used. So for those in construction or in car washes, possibly they're sharing a flat with many, many other people. And they're having to pay quite high rates back to their employees if the accommodation is provided by them. So those are some of the signs. Of course, there's many others. And we're going to quickly cover the Modern Slavery Act, which will be helpful for you to know about the support that is offered within the UK, or the official support. So it came into effect in 2015. And in terms of what it provides, it consolidates trafficking and modern slavery under one umbrella. It increases the sentences to life imprisonment. So for the perpetrators, it's extended their potential sentence. It gives a statutory defence for victims to prevent criminalisation. And it also gives a duty to notify the Home Office of all potential victims. There's also new court measures which are available. There's prevention orders and risk orders. And then there's also the provision of independent child trafficking advocates. So at the moment, that's offered by the charity Barnardo's. And so they work alongside children who have potentially been trafficked. And then there's also increased accountability regarding businesses relating to supply chain transparency. So any business that has a turnover of over 36 million need to produce a modern slavery statement, as well as check their supply chains and just exploring, is there any exploitation occurring within those supply chains. I'm aware we could spend a lot of time discussing each of those, but that's just a very brief overview of what the powers are. In terms of the national referral mechanism itself, the NRM is a framework for identifying victims and ensuring they receive the appropriate protection and support. And potential victims, they're referred through first responder organisations. And those organisations include the police, as well as local councils. But then there's also a number of charities that are also first responder organisations, such as the Salvation Army. And through the NRM, victims of modern slavery, they have access to safe houses, legal advice, counselling, transport, healthcare, education and training, as well as any outreach that's needed. At the moment, the Salvation Army holds the government contract to provide the safe houses and all of the support that is needed, but they work in partnership with other organisations and charities, including 11 subcontractors. So for example, the Medi Trust, which is a Catholic charity, they provide quite a number of safe houses for people who are going into the NRM. The referral into the NRM is voluntary, and the potential victim needs to consent. So all of this is quite important for those of us working with vulnerable people, because if we encounter victims of modern slavery, we can tell them about the national referral mechanism. But there's a couple of things just to bear in mind. So in terms of informed consent, if an individual decides to go into the NRM, then it means that they also consent to give information about their situation to the relevant authorities. And at the moment, the relevant authority, the information goes to the Home Office. And I'm sure some of you are already realizing that potentially there's a conflict of interest within the Home Office, because they do so much of the migration issues, and they're enforcing migration policies. So of course, if someone is a potential victim of slavery and they give consent to send their information to the Home Office, this would also flag up their residential status, and if they have recourse to public funds, and if they are here illegally. And so of course, an individual needs to be aware of this before they give consent. So sometimes the survivors who I've worked with, they don't want to give their information to the Home Office or to go into the NRM because of the concern about whether they will be deported. And I'm sure Esther would be able to, also give more information about some of the policies that are happening at the moment. So it adds a level of complexity. So often what people do who don't go into the NRM is that they have to find other wider support from the community, and they may choose to access local charities or food banks. However, having said that, for some people the NRM works very well, but it also means that they need to consent to receive support through the Salvation Army, and it might mean that they are located in a safe house in a completely different part of the country, and they wouldn't have a choice over where they go, but they would potentially get out of a dangerous situation. But it also means that they would need to consent to engage with the police. So the police would also talk to them about the crimes that have been committed against them. So for potential victims of slavery, it's really important that they understand what they are doing if they consent to going into the NRM. And in terms of the NRM process, so when a first responder submits an NRM form with their consent, there's 5 days in which the single competent authority, which is the Home Office, makes a decision, a reasonable grounds decision as to if this person is a potential victim. So they might decide that they're not a potential victim of slavery, in which case none of the NRM support is available, but they might decide that they are possibly a victim of modern slavery, in which case they would have support for a minimum of 45 days to be able to access the support through the Salvation Army, as well as the legal and counselling support. And during that time, they would also be interacting with the police and other people, and this would enable the single competent authority to make a conclusive grounds decision about if it's definitely, if they are sure this person is a victim of modern slavery.
Sorry, Dan, can I ask a question? I don't understand. If they decide they don't want to go to the NRM, can they go to the Salvation Army or the police instead? And what would be the implications if they were here illegally? Yeah,
so yes, they could go to both the Salvation Army and the police, but the Salvation Army would say that if they want to access their services through the NRM, they would need to go through the NRM process.
Right.
And of course, they could go to the police and report the crimes that have been committed against them. But then the police would say, do you want to go into the NRM? And at that point, it would be their choice as to whether they do or not. But they could still make a statement about the crimes that have been committed to the police.
But they wouldn't get any support or help?
No, they wouldn't get any support through the NRM process. And of course, the consequences of going into the NRM is that their whole case is investigated. And so there have been situations where individuals have been put in deportation centres while their case has been reviewed. So for example, if they have a negative decision, then potentially they would be put in a deportation centre and possibly deported. And there's been situations where it takes a lot longer for the Home Office to make a conclusive grounds decision. And so some victims of modern slavery, they're just in limbo, in that they're not able to work because they don't have settled status while this decision is being made. So I encountered someone a few weeks ago. She had been waiting for the last, I think it was 2 years for a decision, and it still hadn't been forthcoming. So she had a lawyer who was working alongside her to try and speed up that process. So there's lots of challenges with the NRM process. For some people, it works really well, and you know, it enables them to get their lives back on track. But for others, it hasn't worked well at all.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions about the NRM process? Okay. And just to add, there's also a duty to notify within the Modern Slavery Act. So for those individuals who decide they don't want to go into the NRM, if they interact with the police or other statutory bodies, such as the local authorities or National Crime Agency, then they would need to submit a duty to notify form about that individual, but it wouldn't give details about their name or identifying features. It's just a way for that information to be submitted to the Home Office for them to know how many potential cases there are. And of course, the Home Office encourages organisations to carry out duty to notify forms voluntarily as best practice. And I guess that depends on your organisation's political views as to whether you choose to do that or not. So yeah, for statutory organisations, they have to give that information, but it's anonymously done if a victim doesn't consent. For those of us in the charity sector, it's really at our discretion as to if we do that or not. There's no legal obligation for us to do that.
So if we come across a case of somebody who is here illegally and who is a victim of modern slavery, should we report it to a charity like yours rather than, I mean, anywhere else they're liable to be deported?
So yeah, really good question. Yeah, I think within the area that you're working, often there are anti-slavery partnerships who are acting within your geographical area. So I would probably encourage you to find out about your local anti-slavery partnership and possibly give any information to them, because they know what's happening on the ground and they would find that information very helpful. There's also the Modern Slavery Helpline, which is a national helpline which operates 24 hours, 7 days a week. And the information can also be reported to them, and then they disseminate the information to the local organisations as well. So probably I would encourage you to do both of those things.
But how could the individual get support and help?
Yeah, so if they don't want to go into the NRM, then yeah, it's really local charities or local points of contact that they would be able to get support from. So there's no other national network of support that is available for them. So possibly, yeah, it would be a case of yeah, figuring out what's on the ground. And this is really a problem within the UK, is that there's so many people not wanting to go into the NRM, and there just isn't joined up support for them. So locally here in Southend, we've developed a local anti-slavery partnership, which I coordinate. And as part of that, we employed a survivor care coordinator. And so she connects survivors of modern slavery who don't want to go into the NRM with volunteers from our local community to act as befrienders and mentors, as well as practical helpers. And so we coordinate the volunteers to meet with survivors on a weekly basis to help them access and navigate local support that is available. But we've only been doing that for the last 9 months. It's still an early project. But it was really because there's a gap. There isn't a lot of support for those who don't want to go into the NRM.
Thank you.
Okay, let's have a bit of a discussion about barriers to disclosure. And of course, some of this has already come up. But what do you think for potential victims are some of the barriers that stop them from disclosing that they are being exploited? So feel free to type or to unmute.
Well, what we've just talked about, that if they're here illegally, the risk of deportation and getting under the radar of the Home Office. And there may be threats, physical threats to them or to their family.
Absolutely. And in the chat, Esther has written fear is one of the biggest factors. And concern about families being harmed back home. Yeah, so there could be threats to the loved ones. Anything else? Okay, that's a few. So we've mentioned fear of actual or threatened abuse. And Esther's written language can also often be a barrier. We've mentioned threats to families. There can be fear or distrust of authorities. Substance addiction can also be a barrier, or the perpetrator withholding medication. So sometimes drugs are used to control individuals. Fear of being removed from the country. There may be loyalty to their trafficker or exploiter. So the Stockholm syndrome, where attachment is grown between the perpetrator and the victim. There may be shame and hopelessness at their situation. They may not have a safe place to disclose what's happened to them, or they may not know where that safe place is. There may be a fear of curses or witchcraft or witches. So it's been evident within some of the individuals from African countries that juju has been used, where the perpetrator will use witchcraft or threats or curses to control an individual. They might not recognise that they are a victim, depending on what's been told to them and the coercion and manipulation that's been involved. There may be language or communication barriers. They may not have access to money, or there may be debt bondage. So all of these issues, even if someone is able to make a disclosure, they may choose not to because of any number of those concerns. So for those of us working with vulnerable people, it's really an opportunity to develop relationships of trust. And with the homeless community, it was often after 12 or 18 months of getting to know someone that someone disclosed to me that they had been a victim of labour exploitation. So often charities or faith groups were in a unique position to be able to do something about it. So in terms of do's and don'ts, if we suspect someone is a victim, so don't raise concerns with anyone accompanying them. They may be a perpetrator potentially. Also, don't use that accompanying person as a translator for the same reason. Also, don't re-traumatize an individual by making them share all of their story, which can often trigger the trauma that they've experienced. And of course, using sensitive language and providing a safe space to talk. So things to do. So do think about support and referrals to first responder organisations. Do ensure that the individual support understands the support available, and make sure that signposted or referred to relevant organisations where possible. So for example, here in Southend, we did a bit of a community map, and we developed just one page of paper where it had a flowchart of different organisations that a survivor or victim could access. So the first line involved all of the kind of first responder organisations, but then below that there was a whole load of community groups and charities where they could access support if they chose not to engage with the first responder organisations. So having something like that within a local community can be quite helpful to distribute among partners and organisations. And then also do contact 999 if there's immediate risk is present and safe to do so. Do consider appointing a single point of contact for your organisation or team. So just as many faith groups, we have safeguarding leads. Possibly it would be good to have a modern slavery lead for your organisation or group, who would be able to know what to do if someone presented. And then also do familiarise yourself with your organisation's safeguarding protocol, and if that includes modern slavery as well. If it doesn't, then it could be a good conversation to have about including modern slavery and trafficking within that safeguarding protocol. Within the, if you want to see a safeguarding protocol relating to modern slavery, we've got one on the Together Free website, which can be found at the link I've just typed into the chat. So it's a document which highlights best practice relating to safeguarding and modern slavery. In terms of reporting concerns, so here are some of the key numbers and details. So in an emergency, of course, 999. If we're uncertain but we have questions or queries, the Modern Slavery Helpline is incredibly helpful. And they also have different interpreters. So for example, if you're working with someone who doesn't speak English well, you can arrange with the Modern Slavery Helpline to have a translator and they can talk to that person.
Is it 700 at the end?
It is, yes, sorry. Yes, that's slightly missed off the thing at 700 at the end. And they've also got a really helpful website as well, if you Google Modern Slavery Helpline. And then we've also got the numbers for the Salvation Army. And then for adult victims, this is our local safeguarding team, but of course you will have your own safeguarding teams. So it could be a case of finding out what the key numbers are locally within your area. And then we've also got a list of first responder organisations for the NRM, as well as the Modern Slavery 1 forms, the duty to notify forms. Okay, so I think just in terms of our final steps together, it would be really good if we could go through this case study and note some of the indicators of modern slavery that are potentially present, and also what you would do next. So rather than dividing you into groups, we'll have a read through it now, and then we'll have a discussion all together. So just take a moment to read this through. Okay, does anyone want to kick us off with any of the indicators of potential modern slavery that are there?
Obviously, the husband's job is an indicator.
Okay, so what is it about the job that's concerning?
It's the hours and the fact that he's not getting paid, and abuse of being slapped.
Deception, because he was promised a cash in hand.
Yeah, deception as well.
Yeah, and he was trafficked.
Yeah, really helpful. So thinking back to the act, the means, and the purpose. So yeah, we've got him potentially being recruited and promised a cash in hand job as well as accommodation. He's been slapped. So there's coercion, there's control, there's abuse that's been happening. And yeah, the purpose of all of this is labor exploitation. So he's being forced to potentially work very long hours in the car wash.
We don't know whether she was promised the job, but her job didn't materialize. So
yes.
So she was brought over under false pretenses, possibly, if she was offered a job by the people who trafficked her husband.
Yes. Yeah. That's good. Any other areas of concern?
Well, Abud works 7 days a week, 8 till 6, which are very long hours, and he doesn't get paid. And it's obviously illegal because there's no national insurance. So probably they're illegal immigrants. And there's concern about the children that Fatima is looking after. She's only earning £10 a day for looking after 3 children, which doesn't seem very much. And they're not well. They don't look well. They're underweight and not adequately clothed.
And my question is, how did they get into the country without visas and without seeking asylum? Because, either you say, I am seeking asylum or I'm a refugee, or you have paperwork to get you in. Isn't that right? Or am I, is that naive of me to assume that? Certainly with the people that we work in at LJS drop-in, they don't have any paperwork. They are asylum seekers, and we get them referred to us, and we help them with lawyers and legal situation and all of that. So why has this not happened with Fatima?
Yeah, brilliant question. And I think this would be potentially something that would need to be found out. From this information, we don't have any answers to those questions. And I think this is quite a realistic scenario, because often at a drop-in centre, we don't get all of the information that we need. It can often be a process of time where we're working with families over a period of time that actually we really identify the needs that they have. But excellent questions to be asking about, what is their situation?
I mean, if she came to us at LJS, those of us LJS, we would need to see all the paperwork and sort it out, wouldn't we, Jill, Taz?
Yes. That at the LJS, they need to show before they used to show letters. Now they have the card.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't actually have anybody there without some form of paperwork, actually, as it happens.
Mm.
Yeah.
So in this scenario, what action or what steps would you potentially take?
I'd talk to our Sonia, who's a lawyer. Wouldn't you, Jill and Taz? We have a member who's a really great lawyer. That's what I would do. is talk to her for advice and guidance. But obviously this particular drop-in is probably not as well supported. I mean,
what you wouldn't want to do is really speak to other people around her, in case it makes things worse for her, because they're obviously very vulnerable and they fear things. So I think you had to go very carefully. Because it seems to involve a lot of people, the husband, the friend that she's looking after. There's a lot of people involved in this scenario. So and maybe even, I mean, you've mentioned Salvation Army. I don't know whether I wouldn't have thought of it before today's session, but you've mentioned that. So maybe
if you go to the Salvation Army, they're going to be referred through the NRM.
Yeah.
And if they're here illegally, then they risk deportation.
So, but that would be one. I would think would be one point of call. But
and I think one of the challenges is, of course, if they raise questions with their employee about the money for the wages, we don't want to make their situation worse for them than it is already. And of course, if the accommodation is tied to the job, then the worst case scenario would be for them to lose both the job as well as the accommodation. So any help that is given, it needs to make their situation better.
Then I would give them one of our much prized suitcases full of clothing for the husband, the wife, and the children.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's a really good start, isn't it? You know, thinking immediately of their initial needs, in terms of, you know, all of the children, potentially Fatima as well, they're not adequately clothed. So what's the immediate need? Is it clothing? Is it food? Are there local charities that they could be put in touch with to be able to access local support? And of course, you know, they're not wanting to go to the police about the whole situation. So then actually, what are the steps that can be taken for them to be able to be in a better position? And is it actually, you know, to try and work on their settled status? Is it to try and get them registered so they have a national insurance number so that they can then access proper employment? Yes.
Dan, they simply can't. It takes years. We have guests at our drop-in who've been waiting 12 years to get an NI number to be able to be residents here. One particular family has 2 sons who've gone through our education system. One is just done a degree at SOAS and is off to do a master's, and he is still an illegal asylum seeker, and his younger brother, who is doing A-levels, is also illegal. 2 parents, 2 boys, living in 2 rooms. They've been there for 12 years and nobody can get them, even though they were tortured and trafficked in Africa. Nobody can get them legal status here. So, you know, it's kind of to think that this poor woman could get legal status, you know, straight away. It's just, it makes no sense. I mean, we experience at LJS some shocking cases of people who've just been waiting for years and years and years. So I think that that needs really to be taken into consideration.
No, thank you. That's really helpful to understand, and such a sad situation that it's taking so long for them in that process. Unfortunately, we're coming up to 12 o'clock. I would love for us to be able to continue the discussion more, because I'm aware that a lot more could be said about this case, but hopefully it really embeds some of the context of what we've discussed today, and tries to make it more applicable.
If it is a real woman that you know, then let us know at LJS and we will fill a suitcase full of clothing for her. I'm sure I can say that as head of underwear, that we can do that.
Oh, thank you. That's a very kind offer. And no, the situation, it's a hypothetical scenario based on someone else, but I really appreciate that. In terms of, I think just briefly, there was one last question in the chat, which is about deportation after a negative NRM decision. What happens if the NRM decision is positive for someone illegally in the country? Do they still risk deportation, or would they be allowed to stay in the country? So yes, if they have a positive NRM decision, then they are given grounds to remain within the country, and they're able to access the support that is given through the NRM and potentially beyond. That's more a rarity than the norm, sadly, but it has been known to happen. And just to say thank you so much for being such an interactive group. It's been a pleasure. There's my contact details there. Just to quickly flag up, we developed a publication called Slavery Free Communities, which is emerging theologies and faith responses to modern slavery. And we had René Cassin contributed a wonderful chapter within the book, as well as the Salvation Army. There's different theologians and activists, most of whom are coming from a Christian perspective, but we also have a foreword by Theresa May and a prayer from the Archbishop of Canterbury as well. So do let me know if you would like a copy of that, and I can post one out to you. But thank you so much. Esther, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, just before I don't want to keep you any longer. I've just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who's come along today. We're going to go into some more detail for those who are available the same time next Sunday with the same link into kind of specifically the interaction with the asylum system and some more practical exploration of that with Julia from the Passage, who often work around kind of the intersection of slavery and specific issues like the asylum system and homelessness. So yeah, we're really excited for that next week. So I'll see some of you there. We at René Cassin, as I said at the beginning, we campaign on a range of issues that resonate with Jewish community and Jewish experience, including modern slavery, the asylum system, discrimination against Gypsy, Roma and traveller people. For those who are interested in sort of like understanding this a bit more and kind of some of the kind of Jewish and human rights-based framing that kind of impulses us to do workshops like this, please sign up to our newsletter. I've just linked it in our chat. We also work more broadly around the Nationality and Borders Bill, which is a piece of legislation coming into effect over the next year or so, which will basically seriously exacerbate the situation with regards to modern slavery, strengthen the powers of the Home Office, make the NRM potentially less attractive to a lot of people as a result, even than it is already, and make it much harder for victims of modern slavery to disclose what's happening to them. So if you'd like to hear about ways to challenge that bill, please visit our website as well and follow us on social media at René Cassin, and we work quite heavily on the bill and on kind of Jewish responses to it as well. So yeah, thank you so much for coming, and it was really lovely to see you all. Yeah, do kind of like follow our newsletter and our social media and stuff for updates, and I'll see you next week as well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting.
Bye.
Bye everyone. Thank you. Bye, Joel. Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for that. That was so brilliant. I really found it so interesting myself as well. How was that for you? If you have any sort of feedback for us on how we could support or shift anything as well, please drop it in an email to me. And yeah, I'd just like, let me know if there's anything else we can chat about or you want to kind of raise as well. And I'll let you know how next week goes as well, Julia, which you are of course feel free to listen in on if you'd like to. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, that's a pleasure. I mean, it was lovely working with such an interactive group, and I mean, obviously they've got a huge amount of experience in their fields as well. So I mean, that was really lovely to draw from and learn from as well. So it's been a good morning. Thank you for organising.
Great, thank you so much, Dan. Again, just all of our appreciations from us at René Cassin, and yeah, thank you.
Oh, pleasure. Hope it goes well next week. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care. Bye, Dan.